I'm going to tell you how you can save up to $1,000 on your trip to Cappadocia simply by avoiding these expensive mistakes. We spent 3 months exploring Turkey in our 30-year-old self-converted Mercedes van. During those months, we spent 2 weeks in Cappadocia and learnt a lot about the area. We didn't spend any money on guided tours or balloon rides, but we still saw and experienced everything that the tours offered. Keep watching and I'll tell you how you can experience Cappadocia on a budget. The first and biggest cost-saving tip that I can give you is to just skip the hot air balloon rides. It's as simple as that. Cappadocia is famous for its hot air balloons, but is it really worth spending $300 of your hard-earned money just to go float in a wicker basket with 30 strangers worth of morning breath? It's not for me, but maybe it's for you. Being the cheap buggers, and by this I mean frugal and financially savvy travelers that me and my wife are, we opted not to pay for a hot air balloon tour when we were in Cappadocia. Instead, we decided to drive to the top of the cliffs overlooking Love Valley, and once there, we parked our van with a fantastic view of the entire valley floor. This enabled us to almost literally roll out of bed in order to watch the hot air balloons rise in the early morning all by ourselves. Admittedly, we got a little bit nervous once they started coming out of the air, and we thought they might actually end up landing right on the van. Luckily for us, the pilots had not been imbibing in the free sparkling wine that the tourists get after they complete their flight, and our camper survived the experience. Now, the best part about staying on the ground, apart from saving money, which is always nice, is that you actually get the best view of the hot air balloons from the ground. If you think about your favorite pictures from Cappadocia, they are almost invariably taken from the ground and not actually from a hot air balloon. Which team do you think you would be? Frugal traveler or riding high in the hot air balloon? Let us know in the comments. If you want to imitate our experience, but you don't feel like driving a 30-year-old van from northern Sweden to Turkey, which is a fair bit of a drive, then the good news is that almost any rental car can make it to the top of the cliffs if you're a little bit careful. If you don't have a rental car, just grab a taxi, as they're usually more than willing to drive to the lookout spots for you. Of course, if you're one of those freaks of nature that likes to exercise at the crack of dawn, I'm laughing because I can't actually picture myself doing this, then you could always just jog to the top of the valley. But before I give you our next tip, if you found this video helpful, then please subscribe and hit the like button, as it really helps our channel grow. Next up, let's focus on helping you save money on food whilst you're visiting the Cappadocia region. If you love freshly prepared, tasty, and affordable food, then Turkey is an incredible culinary destination. In fact, I could spend a lot of time raving about Turkish food, and I very likely will in another video. Naturally, if you're traveling in your camper like we did, then you can save money by cooking some of your meals in your own home on wheels. If you're staying in a hotel, then you don't really have much choice except to eat out. But that's not really a hardship in Turkey. The first money-saving tip that I can give you is to avoid eating at the restaurants in Göreme. That is, unless you actually enjoy paying tourist prices. The main road going through town is lined with restaurants, and they all have people standing outside the doors trying to encourage you inside before you get a chance to look at the menu and their prices. We're pretty seasoned travelers, but being tired and hungry, we actually fell for this trick on our first night in Göreme. By the time we got to Cappadocia, we had actually already spent a month traveling in Turkey, so we had a fairly good idea of how much things normally cost. And I can tell you from experience that the prices in Göreme are about 2 to 3 times more expensive than you would pay anywhere else in Turkey. In addition, you won't really find any difference in pricing between all the different restaurants. In fact, it's almost as if they all agreed on a minimum price. Who knows? With that being said, some of the restaurants are very nicely furnished, and in the winter they'll often have open wood-burning fireplaces inside that'll help keep you warm and cozy. Although the vast majority of restaurants we went to in Turkey did accept credit cards, the really small local hole-in-the-wall places often didn't. If you're like us and you think that those types of restaurants are actually the hidden gems, then you want to make sure you have a way to pay for your food. On our travels, we use a Wise debit card, and it allows us to hold multiple currencies in one account and convert currencies instantly at mid-market rates. So when we were in Turkey, we just used our Wise card, went to an ATM, and took out Turkish lira. and that helped us avoid any dodgy currency exchange offices. If you're interested, there's a link in the description. Another restaurant tip is to be wary of restaurants that have a deal with the tour bus operators. There are a few ways to spot these restaurants. Obviously, if you see a tour bus full of foreign tourists entering the restaurant from the parking lot, it's a pretty obvious giveaway. But it's not always that obvious. So here's a few other things that you can look out for. Number 1, if you see a menu in English, it's a big giveaway, as none of the local restaurants that we visited in Turkey ever had English menus. Number 2, if you see a lot of reviews left in English or a language other than Turkish, it's another indication that it's a tourist restaurant. Number 3, when looking at the restaurant's Google reviews, if you see a lot of reviews being left on the same day, there's a good chance it was a tour bus, especially because these restaurants will usually try to encourage the tourists to leave a review. Number 4, if there's a huge parking lot that is designed for tour buses, it's another obvious giveaway. And sometimes you'll even see a few restaurants grouped around the parking lot just to share in the business. Now look, at the end of the day, business is business, and honestly, I tip my hat to these restaurants for finding a good business model. The problem is that the food quality takes a hit because these restaurants are not actually catering to local repeat customers. The solution to the price gouging in Göreme and the tour bus restaurants on the outskirts of town is to go out to eat in the towns surrounding Göreme. We found some good restaurants in Avanos, which, although also a tourist town, is more so for local tourists. This means that their prices are nowhere near as extortionate as the prices in Göreme, and there were a lot fewer tour bus restaurants. If you are planning on traveling with your camper in Turkey, just let us know in the comments and we'll reply with the location of a great parking spot for visiting Avanos, where you can also spend the night if you want. Okay, that's enough talk about food. I'm getting hungry. Let's talk about shopping instead, and more specifically how you can save money during your visit to Cappadocia. It's really easy to be tempted by the colourful pottery that's on display at the numerous pottery shops in Avanos. But as always, you can't just trust a pretty face. Well, except mine, of course. Cappadocia was traditionally known for its unique pottery, due to the rich clay deposits in the area. But since the area's rise in popularity with tourists, the vast majority of pottery shops exist for the sole purpose of catering to said tourists. In fact, along the main road between Göreme and Avanos, you'll find several pottery shops with huge parking lots dedicated to tour buses. Now, although the owners of these establishments might be very friendly and helpful, you just shouldn't expect to find anything particularly unique or even traditionally authentic at those shops. If you go into the town of Avanos, you'll find smaller pottery shops where you can sometimes even see the owners creating the pieces that they sell. We went into about 6 of these shops, looking for small gifts or souvenirs for family members, but we quickly learnt that every single shop was selling the exact same patterns and designs. So after a little bit of kind but firm questioning on our side, we did finally get one of the shop owners to admit that most of the items were actually mass-produced elsewhere and just purchased wholesale. Only the more expensive, high-end and intricate pieces are actually produced locally. Of course, those are the pieces that the store owners want to showcase and get you to buy. Despite our best efforts, we simply could not find any authentic pottery within our budget and taste. So if you've been to the area and you did manage to find that rare gem of a shop, please share it in the comments so that other travelers can find it. Although not intentional, we did actually manage to leave Turkey with one piece of pottery, a little glazed terracotta dish that was used for cooking the local rice pudding in a wood oven. It sounds silly, but that little dish actually ended up being the best souvenir, because we're always going to remember the shop where we bought it from and how delicious the pudding was. Once you've landed in Cappadocia, you have to figure out how to get to your hotel. Now, my Danish mother would tell you not to be lazy and simply walk everywhere. Luckily for you, my Canadian wife has made me a lot nicer. So here are 3 options, apart from walking, for getting around the Cappadocia region. The first transport option is an oldie, but a goodie. Renting a car right from the airport is both easy and convenient. This option is, however, surprisingly expensive. For a 4-day trip, which is really the minimum time that I would set aside for a Cappadocia trip, the cheapest rental car I could find at Kayseri Airport was $143. Flying into Nevşehir Airport, the cheapest rental that I could find was $233. So, if you're flexible, you could definitely save some money by flying into Kayseri Airport. Aside from the convenience factor, having a rental car will also enable you to explore the different towns in the Cappadocia region, along with giving you some more flexibility on where to stay, since you don't have to be within walking distance of the major sites. Another huge benefit of a rental car is that you can visit some of the other attractions in the region. For example, you could easily drive to the fascinating Derinkuyu and Kaymakli underground cities, which are only 39 minutes and 29 minutes by car, respectively, from Göreme town. If you want something both scenic and cultural, then I strongly recommend visiting the Ilara Valley, which is roughly an hour and 15 minutes drive from the town of Göreme. Our next tip is to take a taxi, which saves you the hassle of driving in a foreign country, but still gives you a ton of flexibility. Now, Turkey does not have Uber or Lyft, so don't bother searching on your phone for them, but they do have an easy to use taxi app called Bitaxi. That's taxi with a KS. That essentially serves the same function as the ride-sharing apps that you're used to from home, except the vehicles are actually licensed taxis. This means you know the cost of your ride up front and you pay for it through the app. Using the app also eliminates a lot of the typical taxi scam worries, and it just makes it easy to find a taxi wherever you are. For taxis, you should expect to pay a minimum of 20 Turkish lira per kilometer. At the current exchange rate, that works out to roughly $1 per mile. To give you an idea of what you should budget for taxis, let's do some maths together. But don't worry, I'll do the maths, you just look at the screen. The Nevşehir airport is about 43 kilometers away from Göreme, which means you can expect that trip to cost around 860 Turkish lira, or roughly $25. For more local trips, if you were to stay in Göreme and wanted to visit Avanos, for example, that taxi ride would cost you just shy of $6 each way. If you're traveling as a couple or a family, taking a taxi from the airport would absolutely be my recommendation, as the shuttle is going to be a similar price since you have to pay per person on that. If you want the lowest prices for a taxi, you need to make sure that you're using the Bitaxi app. There are plenty of taxi companies in Cappadocia, but a lot of them cater almost exclusively to tourists and naturally charge tourist prices. Some of these taxi drivers can also act as informal tour guides if you want, and you can even hire them for the day. Just remember, if you're not using the Bitaxi app, make sure you know the price of your taxi ride ahead of time and whether they accept credit cards. My last tip is to use local transport whenever you can. Although fairly limited, it does exist. So, if you're an adventurous and very budget-conscious traveler, taking the bus is going to be your best bet, as long as you're okay waiting for up to 30 minutes for the bus to arrive. And that doesn't include the time that it'll take you to actually find out where the bus stop is. I would personally still splurge on either a shuttle or a taxi to get to and from the airport with your luggage, as public transport would involve a lot of changeovers. If you're planning on spending at least 4 days in Cappadocia, then I would spend the money on a rental car, just to have the freedom to explore everything that the region has to offer. But if you're just planning a lightning trip for a day or two, then I would recommend staying in the town of Göreme, as almost all the famous sites are going to be either walking distance or a pretty cheap taxi ride from your hotel. How much would you pay for a dark hotel room with no windows? Cappadocia is famous for its cave hotel rooms that look incredible on Instagram. But just because they look amazing on the gram, does not mean that staying in a dark, damp room is the best choice for your trip. Cave hotels are pretty much exactly what they say in the tin. It's a hotel room that has been dug into the soft cliffs that abound in the Cappadocia region. The good news is that unlike the long abandoned cave homes you'll see everywhere in the region, these caves have been upgraded with all the modern amenities, just so that archaeologists in the distant future can look through old Instagram reels and come up with fascinating theories about how people used to live in the 21st century. Up until fairly recently, there was no restriction on buying a plot of land with some old caves in it, expanding them, and making them habitable. Those glory days are no longer, and that makes the existing cave hotels that much rarer and more desirable. We got the chance to tour one of these cave hotel rooms at the hotel where we did a cooking class, just to see what all the fuss was about. This particular hotel had actually done a really good job of making the room feel cozy and inviting, with lots of rugs and soft lighting. But at the end of the day, it was still a cave. So, as with all Instagrammable things, cave hotel rooms are a lot less awesome when you actually see them in real life. In addition, since you're sleeping in a cave, you'll have few or no windows, and without windows, it's going to get pretty stuffy. So go easy on the beans for dinner. I would also say that if you suffer from claustrophobia, then a dark, closed space is probably not your happy place. Likewise, if you suffer from asthma, then a damp cave with poor ventilation is going to have you performing honeymoon acts on your inhaler instead of your significant other. Personally, I would probably go a little bit crazy if I spent 4 nights in a cave hotel room, but with that being said, I think it could be a fun experience for a night or two. So, if you're up for being a little bit mobile during your trip, you could book 1 night in a cave room and then switch to a regular room for the rest of your trip, just to have a little bit more comfort. As with any hotels, there is going to be a difference in quality between them, and for a cave room, that difference can be exaggerated. I've read reports of plaster crumbling from cars driving by and clothing feeling damp to the touch. Now these are all preventable issues, so just make sure you choose a well-run hotel and you should be golden. Since cave hotels are so popular, it should be no surprise that some hotels will call themselves cave hotels, even though they're actually not. As always, doing your homework and reading reviews will help you avoid the worst offenders. The other thing to watch out for is that some genuine cave hotels will have both regular and cave rooms. So, if you want a genuine cave room, make sure it says it very, very clearly in the room description. Alternatively, you can just email the hotel you're considering and ask them to confirm the room type before you book. If you want to stay in the cave hotel where we did our cooking class, check out the description below for a booking link to that hotel. Now that you know where to stay, let's talk about what there is to see. In just 2 seconds, I'm going to save you $15. I'm one of those weird people that really likes museums, but when you're visiting Cappadocia, I actually recommend that you steer clear of them. Since the Zelve open air museum that we visited called itself a museum, I somehow expected to see something more archaeologically significant than what we had already seen for free on our hikes. But that was definitely not the case. Apart from a few placards with some interesting tidbits, walking through the open air museum was a lot less interesting than the hikes we had done in Love Valley, Rose Valley, and Red Valley right from our camper. So if museums are off the list, then how are you supposed to entertain yourself and see everything that Cappadocia has to offer? Well, luckily for you, if something can be ridden or driven, then there's a good chance that someone in Cappadocia is offering a tour on it. But are any of those tours actually worth spending money on? Do you love the smell of gasoline in the morning? Does having a mouthful of dust make you appreciate the cultural richness of an area? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then feel free to just ignore me for the next couple of minutes. If, on the other hand, you prefer your experiences to be less dusty and smelly, then stay tuned. When you first arrive into the town of Grumman and your mind boggles at the hundreds of ATVs that are everywhere, you could be forgiven for thinking that you've stumbled onto an ATV convention. Don't worry, you're not going to be forced to attend any sales pitches. Instead, all those ATVs are there to transport tourists around the national park on ATV tours. On the face of it, that sounds like a fun outing, getting to ride around the fascinating landscapes where no other vehicle can go. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality. Instead, you're going to find yourself driving around in a dust cloud of up to 50 ATVs and then parking to explore some of the more interesting areas on foot. The funny thing is that our 30-year-old, 6-ton, 2-wheel drive camper was able to drive to all the same places that these ATVs did. So save your money for some tacky souvenirs and skip the ATV tours. For the next tour that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to add a little disclaimer again. If you enjoy being cramped in an old Land Rover Defender with 4 of your best stranger friends, being bounced around on a bumpy dirt road, and being in a convoy of at least 20 other Defenders, only to end up parking next to a mint green 30-year-old camper that has just driven the exact same road, well then feel free to ignore my recommendations. Regardless of that, I would still recommend saying no thank you to the Jeep tours. And also, don't be too confused by the Jeep name. the vast majority of the SUVs being used for these Jeep tours are actually old Land Rover Defenders. During our time in Cappadocia, we would come across these tours all the time, as they really liked driving up the cliffs overlooking Love Valley, which is also where we slept with our camper. Essentially, the experience is as follows. Pack as many people as you can into an old Defender, drive up a bumpy dirt road fast, make the tourists feel like they're off-roading by driving up the embankment on the side of the road, even though the road itself is pretty flat, get to a viewpoint, take a smoke break for 5 to 10 minutes, let the tourists take some pictures, and then drive off to the next scenic spot and repeat. So unless old Land Rover Defenders really make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, then there's nothing in this experience that you can't replicate yourself in a rental car, your own camper, or even on foot. Now, before you accuse me of being a tight-fisted grumpy old man in the comments, there is one tour that offers something a little bit more unique, and that's the horse riding tour. Although you can still walk along all the paths that the horses go, riding a horse along the small hiking paths amongst the hills is at least a unique experience. Especially in the summer, you might not want to spend 2 hours walking around being slowly baked by the sun. And going on a horse riding tour will save you walking, but still take you to the sites that you can't reach by ATV or Land Rover. Since I've recommended that you avoid pretty much every tour and suggested that you don't visit the Zelve Open Air Museum, you might be scratching your head a little bit and wondering what on earth I actually do recommend doing. My recommendation is to use Shank's Pony, aka the 2 stubs at the end of your torso. Hiking in Cappadocia is an incredible way to experience the landscape and also get up close to the cultural legacy of the area. During our time in Cappadocia, we spent some fantastic hours exploring the different valleys in the area with our dogs. Not only is the landscape incredible, but hidden in the volcanic rocks, you'll find evidence everywhere of a past era, from long abandoned cave homes to incredible cave churches. One of our favorite hikes in the area was exploring the trails that run through both Red and Rose Valley. The hike trails that we wanted to explore were well marked on all trails, so we merrily set off for a day of exploring without a care in the world. Less than halfway through our hike though, we realized that the battery on our phones was draining a lot quicker than we had expected, just because we were taking so many photos. And without all trails to guide us, it would have been really challenging to find our way back. Of course, a portable battery bank would have been a wonderfully useful thing to have at that very moment, but ours had stopped working a while ago, and being the frugal travelers we are, we hadn't bothered to replace it. Luckily, between our 2 phones, the batteries lasted just long enough for us to complete the trail and make it back to the main road before the batteries died. So if you do plan on hiking in Cappadocia, which you absolutely should, make sure you bring lots of water and also a battery bank for your phone. Link in the description to the one that we use now. My last tip is to make sure that you don't miss out on visiting Cappadocia itself if you ever find yourself in Turkey. Although it is a heavily touristed area, the amazing history and cave architecture in this region is simply fascinating. Now that you know what mistakes to avoid in Cappadocia, check out this video